为什么？怎么了？等一下，这个歌为什么？干嘛？我就我要连我。你看我这边。等下，他已经重新再跑了，有了。
Ladies and gentlemen, and many of my teachers, colleagues, and good friends, good morning. How are you doing today, everyone? Good? Welcome to the second Eva Huang Memorial Lecture, dedicated to the pioneer of Taiwan's interpretation industry, Eva Huang, 黄胜美老师. And this distinguished annual lecture is to honor and to carry on the legacy of Eva and to provide an opportunity for the interpreters and those who are aspiring to be interpreters to have an opportunity to learn a deeper and also broader interpreting skills and also knowledge. And now to begin, we'd like to firstly invite Eva's son, Andrew Young, co-founder of Presentality, to the stage to say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Andrew. 我们首先有请黄胜美老师的儿子 Andrew Young。喂，那你回应。
今天非常欢迎大家来。那首先我要先感谢师大翻译研究所，陈子伟老师所长，他今天好像在国外吧，所以他没办法加入我们。但是非常感谢师大第2年还有未来也会继续办这个讲座。那第二个也要感谢嘉禾，今天场地包括外面的食物，还有所有的报道流程，很多事情都是嘉禾帮忙，我们非常感激他们。这个我可以of course the most important part are 3 speakers today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your precious, valuable schedule to stay and share your experience with us. So you're doing our family a great honor. So thank you so much. 今天其实也蛮惊讶看到这么多人。我们在筹备这个讲座的时候，陈子伟老师就跟我们说，有葱油饼夹蛋。还有这么多食物，大家一定会来，因为他说他要办这么早的时候，我说你疯了。但是，所以我们大家看到食物的力量。但是呢，今天我们来了以后，我们在外面看到很多人从电梯出来，看到食物，然后说什么有这么好的东西？所以 我们看到其实是这3位讲者还有这个讲座的力量。那容许我稍微讲一下我们办这个讲座的意义，还有它的缘由。我妈是台湾很早期前1-2个 generation 的同步口译翻译者，那她几乎一半辈子都在做口译，都 devote 给这个 industry， 给这个 business。他直到他2年多前，他开始他跟 cancer 跟癌症的战斗，他没有办法再继续做 case。那个时候，我跟我爸其实后来就在想说，万一妈妈发生什么事，我们应该要用她的名字来做什么有意义的事情。但是我们一直在讨论，我们都抓不到一个重心。那个时候，我妈因为我们让她在和信是很好的癌症医院，在台北的北方，还要开车开一段路，然后我们家呢又住在乌来，所以我跟我爸就很常开车北南北南北南这样，然后在车上我们就会讨论。结果有一天，我们就突然想到，对，我妈她非常喜欢帮忙，而且去 mentor 年轻的口译者、翻译者。然后就我们可以用一点钱来做像这样的讲座，或甚至奖学金来帮助下一代，成就我妈她的意志。但是我们还没有机会跟她讨论，她就过世了，非常突然。但是呢，我今天站在这边，我相信我爸也是看到你们这么早，不知道会有葱油饼，都会来，我们就觉得他如果今天在这边的话，他也会觉得这个是对的决定。所以我们的讲者远道而来，我就不要再多拖他们的时间，因为最精彩的在后面。那我现在就把对不起，再次感谢你们来，真的是非常感谢。
我们掌声谢谢 Andrew。Thank you so much to Andrew and Eva's husband, Professor Young is also here. Please stand up. 那这个黄胜美老师的先生杨教授也在现场啊，也欢迎他。And after Andrew, next we'd like to welcome the Associate Professor of the Graduate Institute of Translation and Interpretation, National Taiwan Normal University, Daniel Hu, also to say a few words with us. Thank you so much. 接下来呢，我们有请翻译所的胡宗文老师。
大家好。今天所长没有办法来，所以他就请我代表他。刚才黄老师的儿子已经跟我们讲了一下，黄老师就是在口译界的地位非常崇高，我也就不多说。不过我想讲一下黄老师跟翻译所的关系，就是20多年前，翻译所刚成立，其实我们没有什么老师，然后黄老师就很慷慨，就是很热心的来帮忙，然后大家都对他非常的喜欢，也很感激他的一些贡献。他会就是他特别喜欢帮助比较就是后辈，然后在这一方面他是不遗余力，所以他过世以后，我们其实跟黄老师的家人就是取得联系后，就觉得能够办这个讲座真的很好，所以去年是第1次，然后今年是第2次，所以我们希望透过这个讲座可以让黄老师的精神永远的延续下去。谢谢。
掌声谢谢胡老师。Thank you to Daniel. Thank you so much. Thank you to Andrew and thank you to Daniel. All right, we have very limited time. Wow. Okay. We have very limited time today, so now without further ado, I would like to welcome our 3 speakers to join us on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for T. Gaillard. Let's welcome her to the stage. Shaima, please also join us on the stage. And Daniel Jeblis, yes. 回音再帮我们再检查一下，不然等一下麦克风一起讲话的时候，可能会影响到大家听我们讲者分享。谢谢。All right, first of all, just to check, did you hear the part about the soybean milk and also the fried bread? The people come here for you three, but not for the food. Yes, okay. Just make sure, because we had our interpreters doing whispering to them during the remarks. 那么刚才呢，也有我们刚才3位的这个翻译所的同学帮我们做耳语的传译哦。Okay, just to begin, would you three just give us a short introduction of yourself and your language combination? Yes, we'll start with T.
Hello. I'm not sure I can be short because I'm old.
Then go as low as you want.
I started interpreting when I was 3 years old.
3?
3.
Wow.
Because my family came from the Netherlands to San Francisco, and my grandparents didn't speak English. In 26 years, they didn't learn English. This is not surprising because San Francisco has a huge Chinese community, and many of them don't speak English either, of the older generation. So, having been brought up with this exercise of playing between 2 languages, Dutch and English, it was sort of an exercise that I got used to. Later on, I was sent to Europe to become civilized, according to my parents, rather than being in the Wild West, and studied for a few months in Geneva, but didn't know I wanted to be a professional interpreter. Slowly became one through studies and through experience in a journalism center. Then went to Africa for 10 years and worked for 2 years in Cameroon at the presidency as an interpreter and translator. Cameroon had just become bilingual, and then I became a freelance interpreter in France when we went back, since my husband was French. And here I am, working with the International Federation for Human Rights and having the very eminent task of putting together an interpretation team for the 40th Congress of the International Federation for Human Rights. There were imports for Russian, Arabic, Spanish, French, English, and we were very, very, very fortunate to have a local team, made up of Nancy, Claire, Serena, Jihan, Mark, I think I forgot someone, who volunteered, as we all had. And besides that, I asked Mr. Chen whether we might have some student interpreters come and be with us as go-fors. A go-for is you go for that, and you go for that, and you go for that. But we couldn't put go for on the tag because that's not very serious. So we put student interpreters. But they were more than student interpreters. They were our friends. They helped us do so many things, from getting things out of my room to getting photocopies to calling somebody who wasn't well and saying, "Do you feel better?" They were terrific. And here you have 3 of them right with them. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to the 3 of you. Please convey our thanks to the rest of you.
Give us a big hand. Thank you so much, T. Just to give you a context of what she just said, that the annual Congress of the International Federation for Human Rights, okay, triennial Congress of the International Federation for Human Rights was held in Taipei for the first time, and a lot of international interpreters came to Taiwan doing this pro bono, and also including some of our top interpreters in Taiwan. So it's just been a week-long work, right? Yes, okay. Thank you so much for being here and doing this with us. And yes, give that a big round of applause.
This was the first time that this Congress was held in Asia. The previous one was held in South Africa. Before that, it was held in Turkey, Armenia, Portugal, Ecuador, and Casablanca, and before that, Dakar.
And the first time in Asia, it was in Taiwan. How proud. Yeah, thank you so much. And next, Shaima, would you just introduce yourself a little bit?
So I don't know, it's really funny to speak in a microphone while I'm not doing interpretation. This is the first time. So I was born in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you know what that is, guys. My parents came from Egypt, so they spoke a different dialect of Arabic, and they had a different culture. But anyway, I grew up there, and I was schooled there for 12 years. Yeah. And then they decided to go back to Egypt, so that was a huge change for me. And I went to school there. Maybe this one. Turn this off. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, that's better enough. And I was introduced to English language for the first time when I was 12. But I thought that this was brilliant because I thought that there were only dialects in the world, not different languages. Saudi Arabia, by that time, I was born in 78, so it was really close country, and you didn't really listen to any other languages. There was no satellite, no mobile phones, I guess for the youngest here. We didn't have any mobile phones. You had only like this big phone that you had to ask your dad before using it. So, but nevertheless, I thought it was brilliant because I wanted to at least to learn this language so I could maybe learn different things. Later on, I discovered French, and I fell in love with French, so I started taking evening classes for French when I was about maybe 20 years old. And I kept on. I went to university, but it had nothing to do with languages. I studied pharmacy because my parents wanted a scientist in the family. And it was much later, after having worked for 5 years as a pharmacist, maybe like a few other years also in different things, around 30 years old, I just decided that this was what I wanted to do. And I searched for a school, and I found one in Paris. And it seemed quite impossible, like it seemed like a dream, that I would apply for a school again for this master's, and that I would go. But nevertheless, I wanted to apply for the exam, maybe to prove something to myself. And I was really surprised because I passed the exam, I was accepted, and still is, one of the oldest schools in Europe for interpretation. I spent 3 years there. I'm not going to frighten you with the details. They're very strict in the interpretation. And I've been working now for 10 years. I met Tilly very shortly when I was still a student, and she was the first one to congratulate me and thank me because I helped. I think I was in the same situation as the volunteers that helped in the FIDH conference. And that was, that was a big encouragement for me. And now my combination is Arabic, French, and English.
Thank you to Shaima. Thank you to be a great mentor. And Daniel. So thinking about what to say.
Yeah. I press something. Okay. So, 你好。
Wow.
我是沃斯人。My Chinese stops here. So I came to the interpreting because I was born in 1984. I'm 35 years old, and I a little bit, we can say, grew up between two countries. So I grew up in Moscow, and then when I was a kid, I spent several years in France because my father was living there and working. So this is how I learned my first foreign language very early. I think I was 9 or 10 when I just had no choice but to learn French because I was dropped into another country and without knowing a word of the language. So this is how it started, my relationship with foreign languages in general, because later I added English to that. And I remember there was also a funny story because one of my teachers, I came back to Moscow when I was 13 and I ended my high school there. And when I was in the last year or the year just before, one of my French teachers, because I had a school specialist in French, which helped me not to forget French because I spoke better than the other students, of course. One of my teachers suggested me to try this university because they also have an interpreting school and maybe you could be good at that. I said I was not interested. I said I was not interested, and I went to another university for an economy class, economy and management, which I did for 3 years. But it still catched me because people were asking me to help them translate documents for free for some friends and for money for some people who needed it for work. So when I moved to France it's now 15 years ago, I started to looking into opportunities how I could continue my studies because I had only bachelor's, and I found this interpreting school in Paris. This is how I decided to apply. So I finished it 7 years ago. The same year as my colleague Shaima, and I have been working in the Russian booth on the Paris market as a freelancer. We have a couple of international organizations based in France that have the Russian language as a working language. And also sometimes we have some private market meetings.
Yeah, thank you very much to Daniel. Let's also hear your report.
Well, there's one thing I would like to add. That is how I got interested in the French language. Because I was a child in San Francisco playing with Dutch and English being my native language. But my parents were from Holland, and many people from the Netherlands speak many languages. And although my parents did not go to the university, they spoke English, Dutch, French, and German. And when they wanted to say things and did not want us to understand, they spoke French, which was a great incentive. And then my father, who's my favorite philosopher, felt that the American education was not good. So we had a Sunday school at home. At the Sunday school, we had Dutch, French, nail inspection, my mother's report on our behavior, and room inspection. So that's how I started learning French.
So it was when did they realize that you actually could speak French? They had no other choices but to turn to another language to say something that you couldn't understand.
Well, that takes me back just a little bit. We were refugees. Being Jewish, we left the Netherlands because of the Germans. So although my parents spoke German, there was no question of their ever speaking German. So I guess they were stuck.
Thank you for that. All right. I want to bring 3 of the interpreters back to our topic today. It's interpreting in conflict. Or maybe I can put it this way. Because you all had a very long week, I want to make it easier for you 3. That maybe it's a difficult situation or a challenging situation that you have ever been at that we want to know. Because these 3 here are very experienced and also professional interpreters, and they have a lot of experiences. So I would like to firstly by asking you three, what is the most challenging interpreting situation you have ever encountered in your career?
I guess it's a question of drawing a red line when you do not understand what the speaker has said and you are not in a position to ask it be repeated. As Shaima mentioned to me before, if you're in a simultaneous interpretation situation, if it's really important, you can say in the microphone, the interpreter did not understand, would a delegate ask that it be repeated? But what if you are interpreting for somebody who's really important, like a head of state? You are not in a professional situation. You know that you have to say something. What do you do? I'll give you a hint. The word bluff is important.
Thank you for that. And I want everyone to listen very attentively because after our very short discussion, and then we're going to take a break, and after that we're going to put you into different groups. So our interpreters will throw you some questions for you to discuss in your groups so that you probably can share some of your thoughts with us after that, okay? So pay attention to the hint. Shaima?
Hard to find just one situation that is challenging because I guess there's always something challenging when you're working in interpretation. Nevertheless, I had one time where I was recruited by the French Senate. They have what they call the Groupe d'Amitié. It's basically a group of the Senate that is interested in one country, and they decide to constitute a group of senators that would be friends with this or that country. It's an official type of organization within the parliament. So basically they would meet maybe once a year or maybe more. They would have a small budget to see their counterparts from that country, and they would take a special interest in the French, let's say, French Taiwanese or French Chinese or Russian relations. And they would talk about it in the debates within the parliament. So they invited the group from Egypt, and it was short after, if you've heard about the Arab Spring. So there was a change of government after a president that was in place for, I don't know, maybe 40 years. And there was an elected government, but it had an Islamic kind of orientation, so the French were not happy about that. Nevertheless, the delegation came, and the president was known to be, the newly elected president was known to be a Muslim brother. So everybody was scared of this, especially in France. And they met around lunch, and I was sitting in between. I was supposed to be doing like whispering interpretation, sometimes consecutive, while having a friendly meal together. And one French senator had had a glass of wine, and all of a sudden he started mumbling that they should just, execute the opposition in Egypt. He was making fun of the regime not being democratic. The Egyptian head of the delegation, I'm Egyptian by the way, I think I've already mentioned that, so he picked up on his tone of voice, and he felt that there was something really bad being said, and he all of a sudden asked me to interpret what has been said. The French senator who was head of the delegation, she was a woman, and she looked at me. This was the client, by the way, like they recruited me, so basically the French parliament was paying my fees for the interpretation. And she looked at me and she said, we have recruited you. The gentleman hasn't asked to speak. I order you not to repeat what has been said because he's not speaking on behalf of the French government or the French parliament. And simultaneously, the head of the Egyptian delegation, who's the same nationality as I am, who's old enough to be my father, looked at me and he said, I want to know what the gentleman has said right now.
So what did you say?
I don't know, but I looked at him and I said, I was busy eating and I've heard only half of it. Would you kindly allow me to ask him to repeat so I can have the whole sentence? And that was, yeah, and he said, like, we perfectly understood, we do respect and appreciate that you don't want to, but we will give the appropriate answer later on. He did understand that I was refusing, basically, but it was polite enough for him to accept. And the French counterpart was satisfied with the answer.
Wow, that was a good one, yes. And why is that there are so many people who want to make our life difficult? Yeah. And Daniel?
What was the question?
The question is what would you do in a similar situation, and if you're ordered to interpret something while you were not taking notes, and if you were ordered not to interpret something, where would you draw the line?
Daniel?
Just a little counter question where I will talk about conflict situations separately. Because I've thought about one conflict situation, but I'd rather keep this story for the next part of the discussion.
No problem.
But yes, it was a very interesting story because it's an example of some diplomatic tricks that can be used. Because what you should also know is that sometimes the delegates will blame the interpreter, and which is also a diplomatic trick. Because, for example, they cannot influence the position of the counterpart during the negotiations, so they will blame the interpreter to be wrong, to save some time, or to make the meeting last longer. So no decision is taken this time until they meet next month, for example, or something. Well, this is not from my own experience, but I've heard many of such stories from the colleagues. I will tell about myself because I have another example of difficult situation. But just to continue with what my colleague Shaima started, I have a good friend of mine who left to work for New York, where he works in the French booth in the UN. And he said he was quietly interpreting some internal meeting for the staff about UN retirement plans. So he was basically interpreting like that and reading his newspaper at the same time, because he knew the subject by heart and there was no tension. And then somebody ran into the booth and said, "You go to the Security Council, they're swapping their teams." Because the Russian guy, the Russian representative, and he translates from Russian too, the Russian representative, everybody was basically against him. So the trick he used, he took the headphones and started listening and said, I've just said this one thing and I didn't hear the interpreter say that. I think they're either bad or really tired. We need to change the team. And so it gives him a 30-minute break so he can call his minister, his president maybe, and arrange some time to prepare his next speech, because obviously they were in a big disagreement with the others. Yeah. As for myself, I have been several times in another type of very complicated situation, complicated from a purely technical point of view, not from a diplomatic point of view, because sometimes you know, the world we live in is very fast, and sometimes we are also recruited very short notice. For example, because your delegation, you translate for confirm their participation, also very short notice. So it happened to me to end up at a very difficult, very technical meetings at a very short notice. For example, sometimes even 1 week would not be enough to make a proper preparation. So I have ended up at a 1-week conference on air navigation safety, and I was supposed to work into Russian, but finally I had to work into French, and the documentation was about 600 pages. Another time I also have been hired on even shorter notice for a pharmaceutical factory, and I basically had almost no documentation at all, because they said, we can't send much documents because the documents are confidential, but don't worry, it won't be very technical. And when I arrived, I said, thanks God I had statistics in university, that I didn't do only languages, but I also did economy, because there was a lot of statistics. So actually it's a question that we can discuss later. How would you go about in such a situation? You have to work, for example, for a short notice confirmation, or maybe you are replacing a colleague who asked you to come because he or she was sick. And you have this big pile of documentations, or I don't know, a big PDF archive with very technical documents. How would you go about preparing if you have only 1 week? You will not have the time to read all that.
Yeah, these people. Yeah. Oh my God. So following what Daniel just said, yes.
Sometimes I think they must think that interpreters are either robots or gods, because they don't let us time to prepare.
Yeah, so following what Daniel just said, I just want to go to, first of all, jump out of our context a little bit. I just want to ask you a very basic question. How do you prepare yourself, like what Daniel just said, for a very technically difficult conference, given that you only have very limited time and so much to read? How do you do that? Don't give us too much, because that's also something that I want them to discuss.
A one-word answer. I cram, like for an examination at the university.
Rule for me, I would have to arbitrate between the hours of sleep I need and the preparation. So I will set myself a minimum amount of hours to sleep, below which I know that I won't be efficient no matter how long I prepared. And I would try to find out as much as I can, even if I arrived a little bit earlier, went for a coffee and a cigarette, because unfortunately I do smoke, but that helps sometimes, because I chit-chat with the delegates, and sometimes I ask a question like, oh, so why are you guys so interested about this event? Because there's always a point to start for the preparation, where they will tell you, oh yeah, because we're going to sign this contract and they're selling us this machine, and we've been discussing this for 10 years, etc. So this would give me the highlight of the event in case I didn't have much time. And as a backup plan, if the colleague has already worked, I would take the first 30 minutes and start scribbling the acronyms like crazy as much as I can. Like if you manage to get the second half an hour, but just in case your colleague is better prepared than you are, has already worked for the meeting. If it's a younger colleague, I would just have to sacrifice myself and start. Knowing that the first 30 minutes won't have anything technical, it would probably be just welcome notes. So you still guys have, if it's simultaneous, you still have 30 minutes, but you need to make good use of these 30 minutes to write down all the acronyms that you can find on the agenda, go around asking colleagues in the booth. You will find someone who's already worked, things like that. But I'll have to strategically elaborate on, like let's say, an emergency plan for an emergency situation.
That was a very good advice. And what about Daniel?
Yeah, I totally agree about sleeping. It's the same for me. When I was 24 years old, I could party with my friends all night and then stay focused at the university or at work. now that I'm 35, I understood that it's better to have a good night of sleep. Like it happens to me not to sleep enough before a conference, for example, if I have to travel, or for some other reasons something doesn't let me go. But this is the first thing, and the second thing, a short hint, because we can discuss it more in detail later. But not only if the amount of documentation is too high, in other cases too, but I often try to focus first on the general aspect of things, how this machine works. I mean, machine, the subject in general. So instead of trying to memorize the words, I will try to see the system as a whole. So sometimes I get to that from small examples, which I will find one or two examples, and then try to get a general picture of things, which may be wrong, by the way. I try, but it still helps me, because when people are speaking, I have already the scheme in my head somewhere, which I can correct if I find that this relationship between two things is not what I thought it to be. I can very fastly adjust it. And then the word list and thesaurus comes next, if I have time.
I'm not going to be lengthy, I promise. Interpreters like commas come in couples. And when you're in a booth, hopefully you're with somebody who's a colleague, hopefully even more, it's a friend. And when you're in a situation like you just described, it's very, very, very useful to have the person next to you, and not outside somewhere during the time that you're trying to get into the subject. Especially now in the time of internet, because we have dictionaries that you can put on, and somebody who can write something down, a key word, a stupid key word, or that you missed, and that comes back over and over again. Like the French are always saying fuck us instead of focus. And the presence of your colleague in the booth when you're in that situation can really be very useful.
Teamwork is very important, and since you mentioned about booth partner, according to the information that I have received, it was said to be from some of you. You mentioned about you used to have a partner who would put the nail polish in a booth, or someone who likes to have food with garlic before coming to the booth. Oh, that's your story. Okay, can you just share with us a little bit about that story? How did you maintain yourself?
It is a little collection of the stories about awful colleagues. Most of them are really nice, and most of the time it goes on perfectly. But I'm collecting sometimes some anecdotes, which I always anonymize, but I'm still keeping the story when people tell them. And so the two latest ones were, one was about a colleague who works pretty well. There was no complaint on the technical side about him, but he arrived smelling garlic. He ate his soup and then he ate some raw garlic, because probably I like it too, but maybe if you have to spend 6 hours with the same person in the 1.5 square meter, you would not eat garlic. Or at least check if the other person is not allergic to that. Yes, this is a solution too. You can offer them garlic, and if we both eat garlic, we will not feel the smell. So, question solved.
But don't visit the next door booth.
Yes, and another story was about a lazy colleague, a very elegant woman, who was a little bit late on her schedule, so to save time, she decided to do her manicure while in the booth. So when it was not her half an hour, she would first remove her old polish with one chemical product. Then she would use all the brushes, which is fine because it doesn't smell. And then, closer to the afternoon, she would start to put her new polish. And without even asking the colleague if he doesn't mind. Because I think also it's a smell which I don't find awful. It's a chemical smell which is okay, like the smell of paint on the walls, for example. But when you are in such a small room, it's very, very fastly starts to be not very agreeable to feel it.
One thing that drives me crazy is a colleague, there's usually a boy who's moving his foot all the time.
Booze etiquette, people. Okay. Yeah. So I think we still have time for one more question before we take a break. Okay. It's going to be a more serious one. Yes. I want you to share. Do you have some stories about being very emotional while interpreting? But you have to find a way to maintain yourself, to still try to sound very professional. Can you share with us?
I'm going to give you two stories, although we're supposed to be apolitical, aren't we? A couple of years ago, Trump was elected. It was during the Conference of Parties on climate change. And I was in Marrakesh with Shaima. I went to my room at 10 o'clock in the evening. There was no internet. We were in, and I was convinced that Hillary was going to win. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I came downstairs and found that she had lost. To me, it was sort of the end of the world. I was crying, and at 7 o'clock, I went to Shaima's room, crying. Shaima said, I'm going to put makeup on you, because if you have makeup on in the booth, you cannot cry, because it'll run. So that was very emotional. It was very hard to concentrate that day. But it's amazing the world you change when you're interpreting. Somehow, even the most horrible things that you know about, you manage to put them away. As Shaima said, and I'm stealing her line, she leaves Shaima home. She'll tell you. The second thing was I was in Togo. I lived in Africa for 10 years. And I was going to go dancing with my colleague in the evening. It wasn't too late. We were in Lomé. We didn't go because we were going to be serious. And we were 17 kilometers from Lomé, the capital. So in the morning, my colleague went into the swimming pool. He thought he was in the shallow end. He was in the deep end, and he drowned. They took his body. He was from Cameroon, and he was a dear friend. Both of us lived in Dakar, Senegal at the time. When they took his body out, they said he was dead, and I said I wouldn't accept that he was dead until the doctor came and pronounced him dead. I spent more than an hour giving him artificial respiration. There was blood next to his head, but it was my blood from my knees because this was on cement. I went into the booth, and they had found somebody to work with me. The fellow started by, the first sentence was, it's all right. And his translation was, c'est tout droit. That is, it's straight ahead. So I knew that he was no more of an interpreter than I was a monkey's uncle. So, and I couldn't stand seeing him sit next to me. I just couldn't stand it. So I said, I'll manage. Every 45 minutes, you give me 5 minutes. I did that for 3 days. The end of the story's worth telling. At the end of the 3 days, they wanted to pay me, and I said I wanted my colleague's salary in cash because I knew his wife was pregnant. She was from Algeria. We were living in Dakar. And so I took the money back to her. We had a Japanese plane that was very, very small, and there was turbulence, and I had visions of we're going down, and I was so perturbed that I wrote her name on the envelope in case I would die in the crash, not thinking that the envelope might burn also. But got back to Dakar and gave her the money. But this was extremely emotional because my colleague had died. I worked on him, and I was in the booth. And it was for the Quakers beside that. So it was it was more moralistic than technical. I couldn't have done anything on onchocerciasis or trypanosomiasis or the things that we treated in Africa, and especially not airplane parts like Danielle did. So I guess that was the most emotional times.
What a story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And what about Shaima? You're the one who seems able to come up with some excellent strategies all the time. What about you?
I've been wondering what is my true stress level for years, because usually people react to me saying that I'm abnormally kind of like calm and collected. So I stumbled upon a YouTuber. His name's Jordan Peterson. Maybe he's very controversial, yes, and feminists usually don't like him. He's a Canadian. But nevertheless, he managed to put a personality test. And you can take the test online. It's called Know Myself. So it evaluates you on 5 personality traits, and one of them is being susceptible to negative emotions. So what are your stress levels? Well, like how much would you worry about things that are about to happen, might happen, or have already happened? And the average for women is slightly higher than men. I don't remember, but it's roughly something like around maybe 46 or 50%. I came out as 16%, meaning that if there's 100 people in the room, I would be number 16 in the downside of people who would worry. So it still feels like I'm worried to me, but I learned that compared to other people, especially to women, I don't worry that much. So it happened that I cried, but I only cried after my colleague left the booth. I turned off my microphone. That was a 5-day retreat for women who are survivors of sexual violence in war zones. So they have for 5 days shared stories about how they were raped and then lost their children and family, and there were really truly people from all continents, and the women had horrible stories of being raped after having been beaten and shot and things like that. And everybody was crying. There were about 50 women in the room. The whole team was women interpreters. Everybody cried. I cried for a minute when my colleague left the booth and the lights went off. So this is I think I'm kind of the person who the colleagues would complain that she's not stressed so much, the one that wouldn't mind having a little noise in the booth. I don't really lose my concentration that easily, and I think it's maybe adrenaline or cigarettes or coffee or genetics. I don't know. I'm the person that everybody would be like, why aren't you stressed? And I'm just like, yes, I am.
Guess that's the magic of an interpreter. Okay, Daniel?
Well, I don't think I'm also among the person who are most influenced by the emotions. I don't know if I worry more or less than Shaima, but I think maybe one thing that also helped me to cope with the emotions at work, it's having taken for a few years theater classes, because finally you you have a feeling like you are playing a character, and so you are watching at yourself, looking at yourself, from the outside. From the interpreting point of view, I'd say that, for example, different like horror stories they could make me, I don't know, sad or worried afterwards, but it didn't influence my interpretation so much. What maybe would be more of a risk is tension between the participants, which I would maybe pick up slightly more. Although I don't take sides when I'm at work, even though normally I know that those guys I like and those guys I hate, I don't think, at least I prefer to think, but I think that I do not really take sides, I just say what is being said. What I had maybe more of a difficulty with, it's if I'm worried about something in general, I mean in my everyday life, and so I would come to work and start working, but my mind wanders about how will I solve this and that problem. Because of course, when I'm facing the problem, I have no ideas what to do with it, but the next day, when I'm at work, ideas come up. And this is quite difficult to deal with, because you have to concentrate on what you're doing right now, not on the problem that you have at home or, I don't know, in the family, because you're trying to help a family member to solve some issues. But my strategy was, if I have some ideas come up, useful or useful, I just write them down, so I don't have to think about them right now. So then when I come, so this also made me a habit of always taking all my papers from the booth with me, because I will write down some ideas, some things to do, some terms also for the glossary. And it also scribbled on all the papers. I will write on these, then I will interpret right on these, and on some other paper. So I developed a habit of taking all the papers that were around me, so I'm sure I don't miss something very, very important. But at least it helps. It helps, at least for me, this manual activity helps me concentrate on what I'm doing right now. Even if I if I scribble just some unintelligible signs, it's like if I was writing what I'm saying. It helps me.
Thank you to Daniel. It was a lot to take in, and Shaima just mentioned about Jordan Peterson's. We could do that kind of test, and yeah, he has some very interesting and also controversial viewpoints, but not very suitable for practice of interpretation. His talk, I mean, his speech.
Suitable to be interpreted?
Yeah.
Oh, I do love trying to interpret Jordan Peterson when I'm listening to him, because his style, he's an innate speaker. He thinks very fast, and his style of speaking, like this is a one challenging person if you want to interpret someone. Just try in your head.
So your adrenaline will be full on again.
I don't know, I just enjoy listening to him, and from time to time it's just an exercise. It's like doing, like, I don't know, going for a sprint, running a little bit. I couldn't do like 30 minutes of Jordan Peterson, but
Maybe 10 or 15.
Sometimes I just try even a few minutes, like a few sentences. Yeah, and I also do enjoy his videos.
Daniel, you have anything to add?
I think what's controversial about Jordan Peterson is not a personality test. The personality test is from his, he refers to that, but it's from his purely clinical praxis. That is not, but about controversial characters, when I was preparing for the exams, it was long before Brexit, but sometimes, because I had a struggle with the British accent. I prefer the pretty much American one among native English speakers. It's more clear to understand and to get. So to practice, one of the characters I choose was Nigel Farage. I don't know if you know who it is. It's a British member of the European Parliament, pro-Brexit later on. And usually saying very provocative things, deliberately provocative. But very, very British, so it was very, very fast. So it was a good one to train on.
I'd like to add a question that you can think about. What happens when you know that you're interpreting something that is not right? It's not necessarily fake news, but you know that it's wrong. And you don't feel like being a scapegoat, which we were talking about a moment ago. I'm thinking of a case where there was the people from Northern Africa know little about the people of Sub-Saharan Africa. We're all sisters and brothers, but we don't know much about each other, sort of the norm. There was a Moroccan lady who talked about the millions of sisters in Gabon who were dying of drought. So I said that and said the speaker, because Gabon is a small country that at that time had 600,000 people total and over 3 meters of rainfall per year. So I didn't want them to see that the interpreter got it wrong. I knew it was coming. That's why I said the speaker. That's a protection for yourself. Use it sparingly, but use it.
Very good strategy. Okay, everyone, we're going to...
Because I think in some cases it may be also a tongue slip of the speaker. He mistaked countries. Like there was one US president that confused Austria and Australia once. So sometimes you have a situation when somebody is deliberately lying. Because it also happened to me translating, I don't know, a Russian delegate and then putting on mute and looking at my colleague and said, what the hell is this guy saying? Is he serious? Because everybody knows that he's lying.
My president's very skilled in that.
Okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to take a 10-minute break. And before we take a break, let's hear it one more time for 3 of our speakers on the stage. All right, everyone, let's take a break right now, and we'll be back by 10:45. And when we come back, it's going to be a more interactive session. We're going to break you into groups. Actually, we could do that during the break. Find your partners during the break, okay? 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, up to you. And put yourself into a group. And then when we come back, our 3 interpreters will throw you some questions again for you to discuss with your group partners, okay? Yeah, let's have a break right now.